I want to say thank you all for coming. And since it's 6:30, I'm going to go ahead and open this meeting since we can't bring in any more people unless someone steps out. So with that in mind, I'm going to say welcome to the Tennessee Native Plant Society's Native Plant Seminar Series. This is the first one of the new year, 2023. And to start us off is Dennis Bishop, who will be talking about designing in nature, transforming lawns to native plants. Dennis is a landscaper from the Chattanooga area. He happens to live just over the line in Georgia now, but we'll forgive him for that. It's okay. Dennis he specializes in native plants. He is learning the art and science of letting nature happen on his own 2.5-acre parcel over in Flintstone, Georgia. He has his own native landscape company called Going Native Landscape, which is located in Chattanooga area and in the Chattanooga Valley of North Georgia. He's a native of Dayton, Ohio, and a graduate of the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, where he earned degrees in ornamental horticulture and landscape design and plant pathology. He moved to Chattanooga in 2004 and started the business Going Native in 2015. Excuse me. My allergies may cause me to lose my voice. So if I sound a little rough, it's just allergies. I want to say welcome to everyone here. And Dennis is also, as he said earlier, for those that didn't hear him, he's a member of Wild Ones in Tennessee, in Chattanooga. And he's a chairman one of the board members or committee members who schedules talks down there. And they have a really big conference coming up in March, as usual, for those of you that aren't familiar with it yet. There's a really fabulous full Saturday of native plant talks, and it's usually incredibly delightful to go to. You have the option.
Loud background music. Is that just me, or is everybody getting that loud background music?
Yeah, we're getting it.
Okay.
Karen, this is Richard Hitt. You might need to do a mute all and then let the speaker unmute himself to get rid of the noise.
I apparently have lost some controls here for some reason, and I can't find the mute all. It's not available. I'm having trouble muting some of the folks too, individually. Usually I can find the person and
Usually in the chat, the host has a mute all button.
in the chat.
I think so.
No, I don't see it there.
I'm sorry, I meant to say participants.
No, all it says is invite. It's the only option there. This is odd because I usually have more controls. Yes. But for some reason I don't. Anyway, I appreciate your coming tonight, Dennis. And before we go into your talk, I'll mention that, excuse me, next month's talk will be by Aaron Tripp, who is the lead author of, I probably cannot show this, but there we go, a little bit, a book that is out called Field Guide to the Lichens of Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And she'll be talking about lichens. So next month, we'll talk lichens. This
Oh,
month,
will you?
we're talking native plant landscaping. All right. Now, if everyone would please mute themselves, except for myself, for Dennis, our speaker, I sure would appreciate it. Dennis, if you're ready, I'd
Yep.
say let's
Let me
get
get this
going here.
share screen going.
Oh, let me make you, I have to make you co-host.
Okay,
You are now co-host.
all
Go
right.
ahead.
Okay,
And Harlan, I'm going to make you co-host also, just in case.
okay, we're good. All right. All right.
Yes, we are.
Okay, good. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I had forgotten that my experience with the Tennessee Native Plant Society goes back a few years. I worked at Reflection Writing for a couple of years.
Oh,
And in 2013, I kind of initiated the beginning of the Certificate of Native Plants there. And Mary Priestley came down and was a huge help in getting that started. And I know you all are still involved in that. And I want to thank you for that. That program still goes, is being managed by the Tennessee Valley chapter of Wild Ones. So thank you and for that. And I'm very glad that program is still going, even though I'm not involved with it. Tonight's one is transforming lawns to native plants. I just want to tell you, this is not a how-to program. It's really not. We can talk about that at the end. There'll be a little bit that will kind of lead to that. And if you're looking for plant lists to tell you what to plant, I don't have any of that to offer you. I think there's many better places to get those plant lists. And I just feel like I've got other things I want to talk about, and that you can go to those other sites to get better lists than I could ever put together. I'm gonna just the ideas that come from here, I'm going to tell you, I don't think there's one original thought that I'm going to share with you. You're going to get my take on thoughts that I look at as emergent ideas. And these ideas, they come in colonies. They come through people. And so the ideas I'm going to talk about, you're probably going to say, oh, yeah, I've thought of that before, or oh, I've always known that, or something like that. And you'll see that other people are thinking of these same things at the same time that I am. And I think of these as colonies of ideas that are all emerging, kind of percolating through society and through our culture. As this bloodroot here, this is on Pigeon Mountain, on one of the hikes I do regularly. And probably the two most influential people, if I was to take that group of that colony of bloodroot and pick two people out that have been most influential on me, is these two people. It's Robin Wall Kimmerer, who I'm sure many of you know or are familiar with, maybe not so much Stephen Jenkinson. And Stephen is more of he considers a cultural activist. And he comes on more of the human side of things. And anyway, the book Come of Age has been just a real enlightening book for me, as was Robin Wall Kimmerer's book, Braiding Sweetgrass. And you'll see those ideas emerge as we go through this presentation tonight. This is a meadow we planted, believe it or not, in the city of Chattanooga. It's an amazing place. It's right in the city, lots of noise, lots of traffic, highways. And they have there's a couple of dentists who live there, and they bought 10 acres. This is a prairie we planted about 2 years ago, or a meadow. This talk, here's what this talk is about. There's three things of why I do this talk, or what this talk is about to me, and what I want to share with you tonight. The first one, Sharon mentioned the Native Plant Symposium, which will be here again in March. It's usually the second weekend in March. So anyway, it'll be here this March. And the first year that I went, I was just, it's not to me about the symposium. It was about the people. It's about the energy that comes out of these meetings. And when I left there, I was just so full of energy about native plants. I was just inspired. And I came home and I took the dog for a walk in the neighborhood. I was living in town then in Chattanooga and Brainerd. And we did about a 2-mile walk. And I walked through looking at house after house after house. And this is the kind of things that I saw. And I came home totally dispirited because I realized in my 2-mile walk, I didn't see a native garden anywhere. And a couple of years later, I was with a colleague. We were at work and we were driving home from a job we were working on. We were about 12 miles from home. And I said, let's look for a native garden on our way home. And our 12-mile drive home, we saw not one native garden. But I knew that. I'd made that drive many times. So this coming home thing made me realize we have so much work to do. There's 200 people at the symposium, and you realize it's just a drop in the bucket. It really is. And so we have so much work to do. And that leads to the second thing was this. This is, I was looking for a photo of the 2019 drought. And, this was a late season drought that started in midsummer and ran through the fall. And it was really different depending upon where you were. Those late afternoon thunderstorms can
It's
change
working pretty good.
everything. It can be from one neighborhood to the next.
Oh, I already.
Yeah, this is up at a trailhead here in Chattanooga. I don't have any photos of my own property, and you can see how dry it is. And I remember that summer, it was the first time I really had to water everything. I had hundreds of plants in the ground that were recently planted, and that drought dragged on into November. And in October, I had sprinklers out and was watering. And I realized what you do with the sprinkler on a large property compared to rain is really nothing. You just really can't do it with sprinklers. And then it made me connect this with some of the plant sales we have here. I love these plant sales that we do. We have several here through the chapter of Wild Ones, But when you see people walking out of the nursery with 3 or 4 or 5 plants in their hand to take them home and plant them, and we all do this, and we're all grateful for every plant that is planted. But that's like watering. It's really like watering. We need real rain if we're going to make a difference in planting native plants. And that's the second thing that led me to do this talk. Where is this real rain going to come from? And then the third thing was that a few years ago, I got asked not to preach to the choir, which I'm doing tonight. I got asked to preach to the chamber, not the big chamber here in Chattanooga, but a local chapter of the chamber here. And I was thinking, how am I going to reach people in the chamber, most of whom are not gardeners? They have no knowledge of native plants. I just happened to get asked by a master gardener who thought I might have something I could say to them. How am I going to reach these people, that have very little knowledge of native plants at all, no connection to them? And I thought of 2 things. One, at that point, I think this was 2016. I think it was shortly after Trump has been elected, and you remember that healthcare, repealing the Obama healthcare, the Affordable Care Act was high on the list. It was in the news every day. So I started talking about healthcare. And I said, if we would stop arguing about healthcare, and just start eating better and exercising better, what a huge difference that would make. And I tried to make that connection to native plants, that if we would just start planting these native plants and planting the plants that belong in the right places, okay, we'd be better off. And they all knew about healthcare costs. They did that. And then the second thing I said, I tried to connect with them. I tried to tag on and connect to this. You remember this, this whole nativist thing was going on at the time. This is Charlottesville, and all this nativist thing is going on. And I said, there's a lot of energy in that. Whether you agree with it or you disagree with it, there is a ton of energy in the nativist movement. And so I brought this slide up, and I said, y'all, this land is your homeland. This land of oak, hickory, and maple, this is your homeland. And I tried to connect with them through that. So those were the three things that led me to do this talk, to try to learn, to get to connect with people that we naturally cannot connect with. This is a little haiku poem that'll come up a little bit later. But we need to listen with different ears. Just a little from the dictionary. This is not about plants. This is about people. But when you read this definition of nativism, you'll see the connection I'm trying to make. This policy of favoring native inhabitants as opposed to immigrants, does it connect with you? The revival or perpetuation of indigenous culture, especially in opposition to acculturation, does it connect with you in native plants? Isn't that the same thing that's going on here? This led me to think about my perspective on native plants as I looked more into this. And then the word acculturation, a modification of an individual or group or people by adapting or borrowing traits from another culture. You can put plants right in here. You can. And this process by which a human being acquires culture is particular to society from infancy. And culture plays an important role. Human culture plays an important role in our relationship to plants. I wrote a piece in my blog called Let Nature Happen. It wasn't one of the first ones, but it came early on. It was called Miss Pinion's Lilac. The house I bought here was built in the 1950s by Martha and Jack Pinion, and everybody knew them. She was the teacher at the local high school, and everybody, to get through high school, you had to go through Miss Pinion's algebra class. And my understanding is it was a tough class to get through. So everybody knew her, and they knew their home and where they lived at. And she had a lilac in the backyard. And when I was converting to native plants, I kept walking around this lilac. I didn't know quite what to do with it. It was a big mature lilac. There was beautiful flower. There's a flower right there with an eastern tiger swallowtail. And I didn't know what to do. And it made me recognize that human culture, is related, and our connection to it, influences how we garden. And to change how we garden, we have to confront this, because native plant culture and ecology do not always square with our heritage of gardening. So I danced around this for a long time, and it made me realize that a lot of the big questions that we have to deal with are not horticultural questions, but human culture questions. Here's a few of them. Here's my house, and this is the spring of 2015, shortly after I bought the house. This is what it looked like. And then a few years later, I started planting. You're starting to see the lawn disappear. And it probably looked like this, like this on a day when a lady was driving up the street, and she stopped and rolled down her window to talk with my neighbor across the street. I wasn't home. And my neighbor was telling me about this about a week later. And she said, we were actually talking about my landscape. And I said, well, it's a little, it's a pretty wild over there. And she said, no, we appreciate your landscape. We like what you're doing over there. She said, but I got to tell you this story. Last week, we were out here working in the yard, and a lady drove by, and she rolled her window down, and she said, excuse me, is that house for sale across the street? And she said, why, no, that's Dennis Bishop's house. No, it's not for sale. I don't know why it would be for sale. Why would you ask? And she said, why, it's so unkempt. I thought maybe there was something wrong and they couldn't afford to take care of the place, and maybe they had it for sale. And this is human culture that we're dealing with here, this whole idea. And, it's, there's a couple other things. This is not about horticulture. That whole idea of this unkempt landscape, this is human culture and what we've learned through childhood. Here's the area. This is a photo taken this winter of that same area, and you start to see the lawn disappearing. My first connection to native plants was through Jens Jensen. And this was just rummaging through the library back in the mid 1980s, looking for something to read, and I ran into this book called Jens Jensen, Landscape Artist in America. And I read the book, and I had no idea about what native plants were, but he was a landscape architect, one of the originals that dealt exclusively with native plants. This is back in the early 20th century, in the 1900s. So he was the early 1900s to the early 1950s. This is a picture. This is what was considered the culmination of a lifetime of work. This is a photo from the Lincoln Memorial Garden in Springfield, Missouri. And he's famous for two things: these mass plantings of native plants in groups, and then these council rings. And you see the stone circle there. This is the council ring that he was famous for. And here's a quote from him. Luncheon had been prepared for us in a little town nearby, and the proprietor of the hotel had been kind enough to decorate our tables with carnations. But it was rather a weak greeting after seeing the blossoms of redbud. How gay the dining room would have been if a little spray of this native had been placed on each table. Instead, we had a manufactured greenhouse flower. We are still far away from understanding and appreciating the beauty of this land. So I'm reading this and I'm thinking, I wonder what's going on at the Springfield, in Springfield now. What's going on at the Lincoln Memorial Garden? This is probably 3 years ago. When I go to the website, well, first, the spray of redbud. Then I go to the website. What's going on? They're having a geranium sale. At the place, this entire native plant garden, the culmination, of the work of Jens Jensen. And what are they doing? They're selling geraniums. And I realized he's turning over his grave if he sees this. He was absolutely opposed to this. And this is it's about human culture. This is about human culture, not horticulture. This is about, our history as a people. Has nothing to do with ecology. Here is what Jens Jensen was about. This is the Lincoln Memorial Garden. So I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, and my parents built a home right on the edge of a place like this, of a field just like this. And so this is the early mid 1960s. So this is how it opened up. It was about this big, it was at least this wide. It may have not been quite this deep, but this was my backyard. Our yard ended, and there was a field just like this. We were living what I call on the edge of the wild. One day, they hunted back here, and there were pheasant nesting in this field. And a hunter shot a pheasant, and it fluttered through the field and across our yard, and it landed on the back stoop. It was just a little porch-like place on our backyard, right at the dining room door. There's sliding glass doors there. And my mother was furious, and she came out of the house screaming at the hunters, okay? But I gotta tell you, those were the best of days, because in the years that followed, this place entirely disappeared. So I watched this happen. I watched as the bulldozers came and the roads came and the houses came and the yews and the junipers. And I watched this entire thing disappear in the first 5 years of my life as a young child there. And from my blog, in the years that followed, we all watched oblivious as the suburbs crept and then leaped, lunged repeatedly to swallow the remnants of surrounding country. We watched as the open field behind our house, the narrow creek on its northern boundary, and all the natural life in its disrupted but living web succumbed to bulldozers. I can recall the loss And perhaps I felt something distantly, but I didn't comprehend it, nor did my parents. No one did. Collectively, we were swarmed by progress and the ravaging that we had come to believe in through the messaging of the nightly news and the glitzy advertisements that paid for the news. This has sat with me all of my entire life. And this, even though it got kind of buried, and I'll talk about this in the next few slides. So we all have garden stories, and these stories, are woven into the fabric of our lives. And part of this is because plants are living beings that require nurturing and their personal relationships. And it's through that relationship that plants give meaning to our lives. So my story started right there. It started in that field. And I forgot about that, but that story came to life later. In the beginning, here I am in Chattanooga Valley. This is what my front yard looked like. And part of every story that we have is, what did we buy into? Well, what I bought into here was pine trees and some other nice trees, and about 2 acres of zoysia grass and Bermuda grass. I didn't think about that when I bought this place. I was thinking about the space I needed to start a business and multiple other things. I didn't really think about the Bermuda grass and the zoysia grass and what I would do with it. So I got the Bermuda grass and I got the pine trees, and I got to tell you, those pine trees, the roots from those pine trees cover every bit of grass that you see here. When you dig anywhere in this yard, there are pine roots. So I bought into pine trees. Others bought into homeowners associations. Okay, you bought into that, and that is something that will, affect everything that you do, just like these pine trees and the Bermuda grass does. Our stories involve what else is going on in our lives. Here I had taken on, I just started the business. I had no idea where it was going. I just bought this house that needed a total renovation on the inside. I had this big dumpster out there, and I just committed to be president of the Tennessee Valley chapter of Wildwoods my first year. It was a long year, and I only made it 1 year because there was so much other stuff going on. So there's this other stuff that will affect everything that we do. And this is one of the things, another one of the not horticulture things, okay, that we determine how much lawn we remove and how many plants we will plant. But we don't think about it. This is the stuff that's operating in the background. Then again, our cultural heritage is operating in the background. There on the right with the red area, that's Miss Pinion's lilac right there. And this is the back of the house, and I'll have several photos of this later. So cultural heritage, what to do with this lilac, became part of my story. So the lawn is part of almost all of our stories. And here, this is a photo I took. This is one of the first photos I took with a digital camera. This is the winter of 2000. And I'm working for the Extension Service in Falmouth, Virginia, just across the Rappahannock River from Fredericksburg. And I was teaching a class on lawns and diversity, okay, putting the two together into a program. And this is a house that every day on the way home from work was that there was a T in the road, and the road stopped. There was a stop sign, and I looked at this house every day, 5 days a week on the way home from work. And there was not one plant in this yard anywhere, nowhere except this lawn, nowhere. And so I was teaching a class, and I had this example of a photo, and I brought the slide up. Okay, and it's a class I'm teaching for the Extension Service. And I had there, diversity not, was the subheading, diversity not. Okay, and I said, you guys, before I go any further, is this any of yours place? Do any of you, is this your house or anybody? And a hand immediately went up in the crowd. They said, no, but that's my neighbor's place. And I said, what's going on with this place? And I said, there's not one plant anywhere except the lawn. He said, oh, he's got this riding lawnmower and he doesn't like getting off the rider. If he plants any plants, he'll have to get off the rider. So that's why this is here. And you realize this is going back in time. Okay, the graph up on the right, this is, nature revealing itself, this is the timeline. We're back in time, okay? And as time went on, I changed the subheading. First, it was diversity not. Then I realized this is arrested development, that the lawn mowing at this level keeps us at the earliest stage. We're almost at single cell stage here. We're so far back in time. And that this lawn mowing keeps us at that point in time. And then a little later on, I changed the subheading to biological poverty, because that's exactly what this is. In the end, the lawn, for all of its uses that it may have, its biological poverty is what it is. This is what we have to work with. So what happened and how did we get here? How did we get here? Well, it's development. Here's a photo I took. This is again back in Fredericksburg, Virginia, when I was working for the Extension Service. I snuck across the street. This is right across the street from the office, by the way. I snuck across the street with a digital camera and I was taking photos. And they came and shooed me off. They were wondering what I was doing there taking photos. Okay. And, there's this idea that swords were turned into plowshares, And I got to tell you, this is the kind of stuff, I am one of the very few people that ever got fired by the Cooperative Extension Service. And it was stuff like this that got me fired. That plowshares, okay, we have this idea that these plowshares are this benign idea. Well, these plowshares, in many cases, have become swords turned against the land. I know that's a harsh way to put it, but this is harsh stuff that we're seeing here, okay? And we need to get through this, I think, if we're going to really make progress and get anywhere. Now we're in North Georgia. Okay, this is a drive I made when I'm leaving where I live in Flintstone, up over Lookout Mountain and down to Trenton. There's this place called Scenic View, log cabin rentals. And you see it's surrounded by woodland and you wonder where the view came from. Here's where the view came from. It came from this. This is plowshares turned into swords against the land. Now, somebody told me that there was a storm here that had knocked some of the trees down and they just completed the work. Okay, I'm not feeling like I want to judge them for that, but I'm going to tell you this. Across the street, around the houses, the right, the left, behind, anywhere you look, all the trees are standing, except right here. Here, this is in Tennessee. This is up between Cleveland, Tennessee and Georgetown, Tennessee. And I put this in here because here's one, I'm teaching a class, I'm teaching the Master Gardeners up in Cleveland. And I said, this is in your neck of the woods. And this kind of construction damage is really destructive. And somebody raised their hand, they said, oh, no, that's not construction damage. That's the tornado damage from 2011. That photo you have is just them cleaning up the damage. And I said, okay, I do apologize for that. But it led to this slide, that now they're cleaning up all of the fallen trees, that the tornado knocked down. And what are they doing? They're removing all of everything, all of these dying plants that would decompose and provide the food that would feed the next generation of plants. And let us say that we know that death feeds life and that these dying plants would be the food for the next generation of plants. That's the point here. And the other point is, in construction damage, when you remove the living and the dead. You remove everything that would feed the next generation of plants. Here we are about 3 miles from my house, 3-4 miles up the road. This was a wooded lot. It's a low-lying area, okay, a very wet woods, and it flooded after heavy rains. This area would flood, and I usually took the back road, and I didn't drive this, and I didn't frequently drive this area. And I was taking the highway one day up into Chattanooga from my home, and I saw this. Oh my God, what is happening? Everything was gone. And we're going back in time again. And here again, this construction damage, and here is the following spring, after everything was leveled and cleared off, and you see what's going on. That this is going to be houses. This is going to be houses. And this was the closest I had been in many years to my home seeing this happen. I had lived in the city for almost all of my adult life, you know, where everything's already developed and these kinds of things are not happening. And now here I was back at home. And this is a reminder again to the first slides I showed you of how that early story of mine and seeing this happen again affected me. And this is from the blog. Now, this time, through the grief that followed the tree felling and the piling and the burning, I saw the deeper connection that my own bias and self-interest had always obscured. I recognized that the foundation of my career, as well as almost the entirety of the lawn, landscape, and nursery industries, is built on these bared soils, okay? This is where the industry starts from. You know, developers come in, and I'm not picking on anybody at all here, okay? I do want them to change, but I'm not picking on anybody at all here. But it starts right here. The developers come in, and the easiest thing to do, the most cost-effective thing to do, is to clear everything out, take everything away, and leave this for the starting place for us to begin. And so this is where the industry, you wonder where the industry comes from. It comes from here. What do you do after this happens? And I'm emphasizing this because more and more of the work that I'm getting is on places like this. I started off almost in fantasy land. The first initial jobs were people that I knew, people into native plants. And so I was getting a lot of work with people who cared about the environment, had beautiful properties, had trees, okay? Now I'm getting more jobs on places like this. And what we're asked to do here is an entirely different story. This is the new American landscape, okay? Not so new anymore. And I'm right, this is from Aldo Leopold, that naturalists live in a world of wounds that only they can see. This is the place, this is what happened to that field. This is what happened. This is what's there now. Why can't we see? I just told you what Leopold said. Why can't we see? On the right, there's a red arrow pointing to not a specific house, but to a row of houses right on the edge of this place I've been talking to you about. And so it's last year, last spring, and I'm at the Master Gardener Expo in Chattanooga, right across, by the way, from the Tennessee Native Plant Society booth. And they came over to me and we were talking, and I joined the TNPS while I was at the Master Gardener Expo. And I just had a booth up there, you know, talking about native plants and my design work. And a guy came up to me and started talking. And he said, "Oh, you live in Flintstone." I said, "Yeah." He said, "Yeah, I do too." And we started talking, "Where do you live at?" And he started describing it. And he said, and this is it. It's right here. This is where he lives at, in that neighborhood. And I said, "Oh my God, you live right next door to where they just, you know, tore down that woodland and did all those houses." He said, "Yeah, I can't believe what they did there." He was just all upset. He said the whole neighborhood was just furious about the whole thing. And it reminded me of this, that he bought into the same thing, that what happened over there right next door to him happened here at this place, at his place. He bought into the same thing, that his house was right next door. So the same thing happened there. Why can't we see? Here's Creekwood Apartments, not too far from where I grew up in Dayton, Ohio. I drove by this every time I went to visit. I'd go with my brother, we'd go hiking at a local reserve, and we kept driving by this place called Creekwood Apartments. And I did a little Michael Moore thing, and I said, let's go find the creek in the woods. And so we parked over by the apartments, we went snooping around, and we found them. There's the creek, and there's the woods. You know, why can't we see? Back closer, and here's the creek. Here back closer to home in North Georgia. When I go hiking down south here in North Georgia, I drove by this many times. Oak Meadows. Where are the oaks and where are the meadows? There are no oaks and there are no meadows. There's variegated privet, you know, highlighting. And this is not a couple of years after developed. This is 20 years later. This is 20 years later. You know, why can't we see? Why can't we see? No one sees trees. We see fruit, we see nuts, we see wood, we see shade. We see ornaments or pretty fall foliage, obstacles blocking the road or wrecking the ski slope, dark threatening places that must be cleared. We see branches about to crush our roof. We see crashed crop, but trees are invisible. This is from The Overstory, Richard Powers, which I'm sure many of you have read. Why can't we see? When I was at the University of Tennessee, I'm sure some of you have met Sam Rogers. He was one of my teachers there. He taught the landscape design classes. And when I was there, he brought Sarah Stein to the University of Tennessee. She came, it was late winter, early spring when she came to talk, and she came to talk to the students. And immediately thereafter, you know, I just had to get her book. She came to talk about Noah's Garden, which was written in the early 1990s. And I went immediately the next day to the bookstore, or that week, and picked up Noah's Garden. And here we are now, 27 years later. And this is the one quote that I remember more than anything from that book. Today's children growing up on lawns and pavements will not even have nostalgia to guide them. And soon the animals will be not only missing, but forgotten. That's what I remember. Of course, then the second or third chapter, the unbecoming of a gardener is the other. And then from Stephen Jenkinson, why can't we see? Nostalgia is the halfway house on the road to oblivion. You know, nostalgia has this kind of, you know, this warm and fuzzy feeling, but it's not necessarily so. You know, nostalgia has this feeling of something in the past, and you can feel kind of the lostness in it already. If something is leaving us, something that's on the way, that it's gone or going and gone. And that's where this halfway house on the road to oblivion comes from. Why can't we see? And I recognized that my love of Sarah Stein's writing germinated from my remembrances of this field, of the early years before the bulldozers buried the creek and the open field. And that my early memories, you know, were entombed. They got covered over by all the more recent memories. I totally forgot about this field. It was gone, you know. And now I had this severely altered land that was built on the ruins of native landscape. This became my new home. And I forgot completely about this place. This is that nostalgia, you know, on the halfway house, the road to oblivion. But Sarah Stein's writing, I think it germinated a seed that started right here in my memories of this place. And so I acknowledge that when the native plants were buried by the bulldozers, so was my recognition of them. And the refaced layers of the soil's end of my mind were now glutted with memories of exotic nursery plants. Moreover, many of those plants were on the loose, further scattering their seeds, and as the seeds spread, so spread their memory to the countryside. So not only was my memory being lost, it was being lost at the same time that the memory of all these plants were being obliterated by the bulldozers. And this is my great thankfulness to Stephen Jacobson, because through his writings, I recognize that the destruction of local culture and community and the village mind, okay, disappeared seemingly in unison with the disappearance and the destruction of the native landscape. This has been going on for a long time. Why can't we see here? This is the trail I've hiked more than any other trail. During the pandemic, those few years, I hiked this trail once a week. This is the this is the Pocket Loop Trail. And if you've been to the Wildflower Pocket down in North Georgia, this is the okay, I'm going to forget the name of the trail, but it's the Pocket Loop Trail. I hiked this almost once a week during the pandemic, many, many times. And it's just covered with wildflowers. It's not a spectacular place, but it's a great botanical place. Here we have, phlox blooming. And the photo that I used earlier of the bloodroot blooming, okay? And then the largest colony of black cohosh I have ever seen. Now, I don't get out to a lot of places. I tend to go to places. But this huge colony of black cohosh mixed with blue cohosh along this trail. You see, it's a foot trail. And I'm hiking up there last year. It's just about this time. It's the middle of January. In fact, I've got the date. It was January 13th. I recognized it. And I'm hiking up there and I hear this noise. And the noise kept getting louder and louder. And I heard it was equipment. And what had happened? This is what happened to the trail. Not a few feet of the trail. No, 7.5 miles of trail. Okay, down just above the pocket there. They bulldozed the entire thing. Absolutely everything is gone. All those wildflowers. Well, what happened? See, the memory of these things gets erased. That the people who have not been there, their first trip there, they go. They won't see these things because they're gone. Okay? So this is it. And so not only is our memory going to be wiped clean, but the memory of these plants that's contained in the seeds is gone. So from Stephen Jacobson, the spell of the inevitable. So here we're at memories lost. Okay, the memory of these things is gone. Here's my home. This is this is probably winter of 2014, right after I bought the house. And there's this sense, I can't get better words from this, that if you've never seen it, if you have no memory of this thing, you think that it's always been this way. Well, it's not always been this way. We know this, but we don't know this because we're under this spell, okay, that we don't see. We just don't see it. There's this kind of background assumption that it's always been this way, okay, that lawns have always been. There's always been about lawns, okay? If you don't have a memory, you would think that this is true. Here's a place I worked on. Okay, and out of one of these new suburban places, this was my first time when I was asked to work at a site like this in one of these new developments. And this is a native plant enthusiast, a person that I have a lot of respect for and that I've known for some time. And she asked me to come out and to do a plan. She had to get this through the homeowners association, and she needed a plan, and she needed somebody to help with the work. This is what we started with. She had planted a little small native plant garden right out at the corner. And so we did a design for the side of the yard here. And we had to get it through the HOA. So we didn't call it a wildflower garden. We called it a butterfly garden. And we planted it. And a year later, from plugs, here's what it looks like. This is the next summer. And you see mountain mint and rudbeckia, and there's all kinds of beautiful plants in here and some native grasses. In the back, one of the blessings of this place was a natural woodland. It wasn't a mature woodland, okay? It was relatively immature, but nonetheless, it was a woodland area. And I went back about 6 weeks later. We were building this stone border around the edge. And this is rock that she had collected, and we didn't have enough. She asked me, could I pick up some rock and finish the border around the edge, which I did. And 6 weeks later, I went back and I'm walking up the hill. I'm getting a little emotional here because this is 3 or 4 years ago, and I still cannot forget this. I'm walking up the hill and I get this blast of light. I don't know, it's early morning and this light is just shining through. What has happened? And I walk through. That's what happened. The entire woodland was absolutely gone. This is 6 weeks. And it made me realize the destruction that is done on one day like this, or in this 6 week period, is more than I can repair in a lifetime. And I say to you this, it's hard to restore life when so much life has been taken. And we're back here to this first photo. It hasn't always been this way. It's not inevitable. It just is not inevitable. Here is, I'm planting the front meadow out at my place. This is a year after I planted this in the early fall of 2016. It was another drought year. That was the year that the fire ran up Lookout Mountain, and there was the great fire over in Knoxville, that turned deadly. It was very, very dry, and this didn't end till November. And I planted all these plugs during that drought. It was rock hard clay. This was all clay. Parts of my yard are very fertile. This area was not. And I had to dig the holes for the plugs with a steel-handled spade. And I realized the cost. I was just exhausted, absolutely exhausted. And I was just wondering, what am I going to do? How am I possibly going to do the rest of this property, these plans that I had? And from the blog again, that those of us encumbered by these lawns, we have impoverished land, okay? Where are the riches going to come from? I'm a horticulturist. I was planting landscapes at that point. I had access to all these plants, okay? And to my knowledge, I had all these benefits. How about other people who don't have these benefits, okay? And this is what I came to realize. We must learn to recognize and welcome what I call nature's provisions. And this is where the blog came from. We have to let nature happen. We have to garner nature's energy if we are going to make a real difference. We need a different story. Here we are back at the beginning at my place. You see the dumpster still out there. There's Miss Pinion's lilac down there on the right. And here is now. This is late summer. And I can tell you, I planted some of this stuff. There's some pin oaks there I planted. I planted a sweet bay magnolia down there on the right. There's some Elysium parviflorum, but almost everything you see here came from nature. There's some plants that were given to me, donated. Everything else came in on its own. All I did was, one, I stopped mowing. I just stopped mowing. And from Robin Wall Kimmerer, the story of Sky Woman, she fell like a maple seed pirouetting on an autumn breeze, and her grasp were branches fruits and seeds of all kinds, wild grasses, flowers, trees, and medicine spread everywhere. Now the animals too had plenty to eat. That we need a different story. And this is that whole story of Sky Woman. If you've read that book, you know, she talks about the need, the importance of story and the importance of changing our story, that we need a different story. So it's more than horticulture. It's more than horticulture. It's about the stories that are living in the background of the lives that we live that we don't acknowledge. And I began to let the plants do the speaking. Remember that early slide about the ears that hear the plants being different? Well, I opened my ears up and I began to let the land do the speaking. Here's that same spot. Here's the corner of the driveway looking towards the back. In the background is Lookout Mountain. Here's that corner, you know, in the winter after I bought it. Here I planted at the corner, there's Rus aromatica right there, you know, that just flourished in that spot, very rich soil there. And from a different view, that same spot, here's this past fall, I planted the Rus. I planted some bottle brush buckeyes. I planted, what else? I planted a black gum in the background. Everything else in this photo is either transplants from other places in my yard, gifts from friends, or things that came on their own. The sweet gum, there's a black cherry there that's probably got a 5-inch caliper trunk on it now, all came on their own. And all I did was just stop mowing and start letting this place fill in on its own. The land began to speak. And now I had nature's energy working with me. The tagline for my blog is the self-conserving native landscape. And that tagline came, you know, again, through as I'm working out the story and trying to figure out what I'm going to have to do, knowing that at one point, this place was probably all woodland, almost certainly was. It took care of itself. And how can we create landscapes that conserve themselves? You know, how can we recreate these self-conserving landscapes? And that became my goal here. So again, here's a place where I just stopped mowing. You saw this earlier. This was all lawn right into here. I stopped mowing. I spot sprayed with glyphosate to kill off some things. I hand pulled a lot of stuff. I let the needles fall. I let the leaves fall. I left all the branches fall. Okay, no branch has ever been removed from here. And this is what that place looks like now. So this is the goal, to create these self-conserving native landscapes. Okay, and I'm sorry about all the reading. I hope you can bear with this. But this is important. I recognize that these native gardens that I have been building, they were ideals, okay, in which the gardener, in this case me, was viewing him or herself as separate from nature, but it's not sustainable. It inevitably leads to a clash, a head-on encounter, when gardeners trying to force their will on the land, which I had been doing for decades, come face to face with nature's will. Nature's plants, all of them, they're hardwired to self-conserve. Plants long to belong, to restore themselves invariably and relentlessly. And their restoration has nothing to do with ideals. There's no guiding ideals. It's based on the ancestral memory that's stored in the mother plants of each species. And it's seeds that carry their longing from one generation to the next. Plants do not do otherwise. And if we would only accept this fact, if we would garden with intention, recognize that there's no ideal garden, and allow nature to unfold in our midst, then a new relationship might develop from which beautiful natural landscapes can emerge. It's the union of two heretofore disparate wills. There's this concept, again, I thank Stephen Jenkinson for, just called the welt. It's this meeting place where human culture, meets the wild. I read about, you hear about people going on these wilding adventures, but we're not of the wild. We are domesticated beings, I wouldn't turn my cat loose, but I don't have a cat. I wouldn't turn my dog loose in the wild. Or if you have a cat, you wouldn't turn your cat loose in the wild. Your cat has no business in the wild. Neither does my dog, and neither do we. We may go visit the wild, okay? But we are not of the wild. We are cultured people. We're domesticated people, okay? The Welt is a meeting place of field and forest, okay? It can be looked at in that way. It's an overlapping of two edges. It's the place where our diverse understanding of human culture meets with the mystery of the forest. A lot happens here. It's a place of great biological activity. It's home to a lot of wildlife species. Okay. So what I'm proposing is that we need to learn to work on the edge, what I call the edge of the wild. Here is at Inglewood Reserve in Dayton, Ohio. And this is a place, I took this photo maybe 7 or 8 years ago. This is a place that's managed to control burning. Okay, but over on the right-hand edge where you see the yellow arrow, there's the place where you see the merging of the field and the forest, okay? And we need to learn to work in that space, right there. That's where we need to learn. And I wrote about it, and I'm proposing, and if anybody is ever interested in this, contact me, because I would love to start a school sometime, okay, called Working on the Edge of the Wild or something like that, that trains people how to work in this space between human culture and the wild. This is the place we need to learn to negotiate. How do you work in this space right here? What do you do? And thinking more about this place, I wonder what kind of place it actually is. It's a physical place, but it's also a living, vibrant engagement, a meeting of two wills. It's an encounter of wild and domestic beings, both longing for life and nature, okay? And it's in the convergence of this will, of these wills, where we are gathered with the wild into the ways of nature. That's what I call it. I call it being gathered into the ways of nature. Learning the ways of nature. This is over at the Chickamauga battlefield, a few miles from my home. I take the dog walking over here and hike. And there's these tree falls. Well, what happens here? Well, there's a huge opening. And where there's an opening, light comes in and it changes the nature of the plants that will grow here. That's one of the ways of nature. We know here's milkweed. This is up at a reserve in Dayton, Ohio. That milkweed disperses these seeds as dandelions do, okay? They get caught in the wind, and when they get caught in the wind, they do drifts. And here's a drift. This came up on its own entirely when I stopped mowing under the front pine trees. I just stopped mowing. This colony of Lysomycia lanceolata emerged, okay? So plants seed and they blow in drifts, okay? And when they're allowed to flower, then the pollinators come, you see? This is learning the ways of nature. And so as we learn these things, nature will gather us in. And the way of that gathering is self-conservation. And what I noticed, that the more I worked with this, the less I mowed, the more I let nature start to speak, that as I was gathering and breathing in the native landscape, that I was being gathered into the ways of the self-conserving landscape. I was learning the ways. And what I had to do was stop looking at the landscape from outside and looking in at it, trying to figure out what I was going to do with it, but to step into the landscape and imagine what wants to happen here. What is the way of nature? And this changed the way that I design landscapes. There's this beautiful story in Braiding Sweetgrass, Robin Wall Kimmerer. It's called, the chapter's called Collateral Damage. And some of you may remember this. It's a night at home. She's at home with her two daughters, and they're getting ready to go out. And the nightly news is on. It's not sure what year it is, but it's the year that the United States invasion of Iraq has just begun. And there's bombing, they're bombing Baghdad and other places. And it's all the nightly news, all over, hour after hour, talking about collateral damage, okay? And that's where the title of the chapter came from. And that night, what was Robin doing? She gathered her two daughters, and they went out in the night with flashlights along a busy road. And what were they doing? Well, the road there dissected the path. If you don't know this story, the road, okay, dissected the way that the spotted salamanders burrow into the ground during the winter months. And in early spring, when it begins to rain, as the ground thaws, they emerge from the ground. And they go down the hill, and they have to cross the road to get down to the pools of water and the small ponds where they'll spawn. And they were down there that night, picking up the salamanders as they came to the road and carrying them across the road, because so many of them were killed by cars as they were crossing, okay? This is being gathered in to the ways of nature. Here's at Charlotte Freeman's house here in Chattanooga. You know, here's a case where not nature providing, but we provide. You know, Charlotte started with a small group of these blue-eyed Marys, and nature decided to spread them around. So we provide and nature decides. That's one part of it. And then the second part I've been talking about is that nature provides and we decide. And please let me read this, because this, and sorry about the long reading, but let me read this. We begin, okay, by allowing nature's memory to begin the restoration story. It seems to me that this sets the relationship right in the opening chapter. The sequence is to allow and remove, then allow and remove again repeatedly, all the while preserving the native plants that come up along with the invasive plants that we're removing. And yes, this involves a lot of control work, but it sets in motion the practice of allowing, okay? And through this strategy, nature leads by divulging what it, she, he, and this term it, you know, that'll be another story, has in store, and we respond to the lead. Now we have a two-sided deal. We're out of this gardener in charge, one-sided deal. We make all the decisions. Nature's leads here. And it made me realize for the 4 decades, you know, there was this hidden belief that I never, you know, it's another this thing operating as part of this spell that we never think about. If it wasn't planted with human hands, then it's a weed. That's what I grew up thinking. That's what you know, this is what we all thought. If it wasn't planted by us, it's a weed. But no, it's a two-way relationship. Here is the back corner. This is close to Miss Pinion's lilac in the spring. I planted there's the golden ragwort in the background. That came to me from a friend, pulled out of the ground, bare root in the middle of the summer and replanted, and it took off. So I provided and nature decided to keep. And in the foreground, here we have, you know, native violets, Viola aurea and others, okay? Nature provided, and I decided to leave it. So instead of lawn, you know, I have a plant that many still consider a weed, okay? the violets growing in mass there. And you can see it's beautiful here. I didn't have to do anything, okay, except stop mowing and do some weeding and let the violets take over. And Stephen Jenkinson, again, thank you for this. You know, he talks about in his book, not about, plant ecology, not about plant culture, but about human culture and the destruction of local culture. That local culture has been so decimated. What did we do? I mean, how do we get started again, building back, real functioning communities of people who really know each other, that are village minded? And his answer is, we start with our poverties. You start with whatever you have. And here in my backyard, right outside the back door, I just stopped mowing, okay, started weeding out the invasives, and what emerged, a huge bed of Plantago rugelii, our American plantain, okay? An edible plant, a medicinal plant. I didn't have to plant anything. This came entirely on its own. And in the background, you see some wild petunia, some ruellia. That came up entirely on its own. The only thing I planted here, there's a native hydrangea on the back right. Okay, so in designing with nature, here's my 10 things I would leave you with rather than a how-to list. So I got 10 slides and a few more. First, okay, if you want to know how to design this land, design in nature with native plants, the first thing is claim this land as your homeland. That's the very first thing I think we need to do. And that includes everything you see in this picture. Privet, which you see in the background, that's our homeland now, okay? That is our part of our homeland. We have to acknowledge that and accept that and figure out how we're gonna work with that, okay? So claim this land as your homeland. Secondly, do not forget that this land longs to be woodland, okay? This is at the bottom of Pigeon Mountain. You see the woodland in the background. That's the trail I was going up where the bulldozer ran. Okay, but the trail begins in you walk up the hill, you go through the open field, then the trail begins that was all bulldozed through there. But this field, if they didn't, brush cut this or cut this, through the year, this would want to be woodland. So know that your place wants to be woodland, and that will always influence everything you do with design, okay? And then third, let nature happen. Gardening most always imposes and very rarely allows. Stop mowing, just stop mowing. That's the first thing. I know this is HOA stuff and there's a lot of stuff involved here, but if we don't stop mowing, you'll never know what you have. I didn't know I had that Lysomycia until I started to stop mowing, and many other things that have come up. I've got a whole list of things, and if I ever gave you a plant list, that's what I would give you. Number 4, plant locally adaptive native plants. Okay, there's one. Here's the second one. This is a little labyrinth up at Nora Bernhardt's place on Signal Mountain here in Chattanooga. And we did the planting here. The design was done by Matt Whitaker. We did all the planting here. Nora designed the labyrinth, and then we were trying to figure out what to put in here. We went round and round about what plants to put in the labyrinth. And Charlotte Freeman offered us some American ginger, and we planted it in here. All of those plants came for free. And you know how aggressive American ginger is. Now, every year, Nora has to dig this out, okay? It has to come out, and she shares these with friends, okay? So hundreds and hundreds of plants have come out of here, okay? These locally adapted plants have been shared with other people. And then 5, to make a difference, we got to get out of this idea of planting these huge plants. Plant small and plant in quantity. I have planted probably at least 10 to 12,000 of these plugs since I started the business. I'm not planting anymore, I'm just designing. But I've got all the stacks of the plug trays in the back. Plant small and plant in quantity if you want to make a difference. Plant in mass. Here's my front yard. Okay, this may have been last year or the year before. This was all lawn, okay? This comes from planting in 10s and 20s and 30s, not in 1s and 3s and 5s. And again, I applaud every native plant that's planted. But to make a difference, we got to plant more plants, and we got to plant small. And one of the biggest mistakes people make, the people who have the money and the time and are committed to native plants, is they plant in 1s and 3s and 5s, and then look at it and they're never happy. And I said, you got to plant in groups. You got to plant in masses, not just for the environment, but to please your eye. It looks good. And then 7th, we got to make peace with invasive plants. I think the next 10 years is going to be the time where this rethinking of these invasive plants and all the removal and all the work and all the chemicals that are involved in this process is going to be rethought. And the whole idea of letting nature happen and letting nature do the work is going to involve making peace with these invasive plants. That nature is relentlessly restoring itself. It's self-conserving, okay? And these plants are part of the process. They're just like anything else. They're longing for life, okay? And the choice, I'm convinced at this point, okay, for many people, it's going to be lawn or wild places with invasive plants, okay? Because we have so few gardeners anymore. It's going to be lawn or invasive plants, the choice between the two. And then let nature do the weaving. So there's this, we provide and nature decides, okay? Nature provides and we decide. And then nature does the weaving of these plants. Here, aromatic aster, weaving edge with broom sedge, and there's a lot of other perennials in there that are being masked by the broom sedge here in the fall. And here, coral honeysuckle, there's some native viburnums in the background. And then this senecio that came in entirely, it's on its own. I didn't plant any of this. I've been spreading on its own, and nature did the weaving of pulling all this stuff together. Okay. And then recognizing we live not on the earth, but in the earth. And this is a David Abrams concept. This is where I got this from the spell of the sensuous. But we live in the animate universe, that the universe is alive, and we're connected to this. With every breath we take, we are connected, that we are part of nature and not separate from us. And that when we recognize we're in it, we recognize that these plants are our kin. And this is from Robin Wall Kimmerer, this idea that plants are kin. These are our people right here. These violets, the native grasses, all the things that have come up on their own and the things that I planted, they're our kin now. These are our people. And when we recognize that, it changes our relationship to everything. And that through this animate matrix, we have an ancestral memory, okay? We have an ancestral trees whose memories connect us to our own ancestors and to the ways of nature. They may be gone from view, but they're there, lamentably, but not fatally. They're covered by the sediment of more recent memories, memories fixed by habit and the dogged advertising campaigns of industry, which suggest that we're here to dominate the earth rightfully, as we will, oblivious to the costs, and without question, okay? We have to get connected to this memory. I'm convinced that it's there. It arose for me in my memories of this field right here, and it's still with me. And that ancestral memory, I am convinced, led me to this. This is my front yard. That was all lawn. Here it is now. And this is probably two summers ago. And you can see it's the time of Monarda fistulosa and Rudbeckia and Eupatorium perfoliatum and some goldenrod. Okay. It was my memory of these things, okay, that brought me here. And so, buried alive in generations past, might there be visions of open fields and woodland and wild creeks and wild rivers and wildflowers, carried in our DNA, vanished from the surface, lost to our present, but not gone? These dormant visions may be longing for life if we can unearth them. Maybe we will discover that this native land, this forest of oak and hickory and dogwood, is indeed our homeland. It's akin perhaps to what Susan Samar discovered through decades of tree research in the American Northwest. Her discovery was expressed simply, directly, beautifully in the title of her most recent book. It's called Finding the Mother Tree. That's where her research led her, to the mother tree. That's it. We have to find the mother tree. We need to lead people to the mother tree. That's where we have to get to. And the shame here is that their memories of these things, many people have no memory at all of these things. None at all. None. And my hope is that somewhere in our DNA, and to me, this is our only hope, that somewhere in our DNA, there is some connection still living, just in the way that the oak that's growing here in my yard, the DNA of that white oak contains the DNA of the first white oak. It's still there. It's still there. It may be buried many generations ago, but it's there. And I'm convinced that this is in our DNA too. We've got to connect it to it. Okay. And I am proposing, the other thing I'm proposing, if anybody is interested, I want to talk to you, of doing a plant sharing network. I wrote a piece called We Are the Native Plant Nursery. And the idea here is that as we plant our yards with native plants, they're nurseries. Every yard with native plant is a nursery. It's a nursery for plants that can be shared with others, especially those beginning, okay? And I have thrown this out here to my neighbors. I've thrown it out to a few friends. And the problem is not the plants. We have the plants. It's the people. It's getting people gardening and getting people working with these plants. So a plant sharing network, okay? And then you all have been, this has been viral, for a while, and many of you have seen this story, but it's Janet and Jeff Crouch in Columbia, Maryland. I spent some time working close to there in Baltimore, and they fought the lawn and the lawn lost. If you know, many of you know the story, but their HOA, was, I forget what exactly they did. They tried to force them to take out their native plants and put in lawn, and they fought it in the courts. It cost them $60,000 is what I read to get through the courts, okay, and to get the law changed in Maryland. But eventually they won, that they became co-conspirators, as Robin Wall Kimmerer called it. And a quote from her book, in that moment, I know that I'm not alone. I lie in the meadow surrounded by legions who do stand with me. I know not what to do, but they do. And so we co-conspire. We need to co-conspire with the plants. They are on our side. And this quote from her came on a day when she was feeling some sense of lostness, but that knowledge that plants are on our side in this deal, okay, as are people like Janet and Jeff Crouch. And the final two slides, designing, I came to see, is real fairy work. And I'm not talking about the fantasy Disney stuff here. I'm talking about fairy work, real people doing real fairy work. Okay. Okay. And like fire with a touch of wind, these plants will propel themselves forward. And when they get a foothold, it's the first step to healing the land. And other beings will begin to flourish. So, this all began with plants, that before there were these animals, plants were here first to be the food for the animals that would come later. So we need to reverse this. It begins with people like us. It begins with the plants. And thankfully, these plants are efficient. They long to restore the land. And with our helping hands, their efficiency can be compounded. And the transplants, they're kindling for fire, perhaps the seventh fire, the green path we choose to restore the earth. And you can read about this more with Robin Wall Kimmerer, but there's this Native American idea that there will be a coming of the seventh fire, but it's a path that we choose. It's not going to happen to us. It's a path we choose, okay, to be part of. It's being gathered in to the ways of nature that I mentioned before. And finally, from Robin Wall Kimmerer, the one line I remember from the book, if any, we're dreaming of a time when the land might give thanks for the people. And thank you.
Thank you. Wow. That's a lot to think on.
Yeah, sorry to unload all on that, but that's it. That's what I got for you. Thank you.
It's a lot to think about. I'm sure this recording will be watched many times over. What you have said, for many of us, will warrant re-listening, reviewing. But I think the takeaway is pretty phenomenal. It's a good way to start the new year. We thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome.
There are a lot of kudos, a lot of thanks in the chat. There aren't very many questions, but there are a lot of thanks.
Okay, thank you. All right. If there are any questions, I'd be glad to answer any questions you have. If you have more practical things you want to talk about, I'd be glad to talk about that with anybody.
One is asking for your contact information. Lots of them. Comments are great job, great presentation. There are some references for books that have been placed in the chat.
Okay.
One question is redwood tree native to Tennessee? I don't think it is. Do you know?
Oh, well, no,
We wouldn't have the soils for it, I don't think.
no, nor the weather, nor climate.
Mm-mm. Wonderful presentation. One question was about poison ivy. Is it native? Yes, it is native to Tennessee. It's beautiful. It can be beautiful. I know it's very irritating, and a lot of people cannot have it in there because of allergies, cannot have it anywhere near them in their yard because of that. I understand. There's some examples of similar processes of people going through what you went through. Let's see. Lots of good information in the, if anybody has put a question in the chat and haven't heard the answer in the last few moments, you might want to just check the chat because your information is all there. your answers are there. If anybody has a question you'd like to ask, please unmute yourself and ask away. Anybody? Please unmute yourself if you want to ask a question.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, Dawn.
This is Dawn Ebert. I have a question. We bought several acres, and now it's pasture land. We want to turn it either into woodland or meadow. But what's the best way to create acres of meadow? Thanks.
Yeah, Dawn, well, there's two ways. One is just to, what I talked about earlier, and that is to let nature happen. And if you let nature happen, you're eventually going to have woodland and you're going to have invasive plants. And your job will be to what I was trying to talk about throughout the program, and that is to allow. The first thing you have to do is begin allowing. Okay, you got to let nature happen. You got to begin allowing, and then taking out the things, the invasive plants, the things you don't want, and allowing other things to grow. The meadow that you saw several photos of, the big meadow, not at my place, but the big meadow, that was all planted with seed, and that's your other options to plant with seed. But first, I know this is not everybody's going to agree with this, but just about everybody who does this regularly for a living, okay, you have to kill off what you have. You know, if you're going to do a seed meadow, you've got to get rid of what you have. Otherwise, the seed you put down will be completely run over and you'll lose most of what you started. Not entirely, and I'm not saying it's the only way to go, but the best way, by almost all accounts, from the people who do this regularly, is you've got to kill off what's there. That means spraying, probably with glyphosate, the area multiple times, and you've got to start the year before. Kill off, and then spread your seed the following spring. And then the other choice is what I said earlier, you got to let nature happen. Let nature do the work, and you become secondary. And that's what I'm doing at my place now. Initially, I was doing all the planting. Now I've stepped back and letting nature do most of the planting, and I'm just weeding and taking out the things that I don't want. So nature's providing, I'm deciding. And there's plenty of information out there. I would suggest one round stone, I mean round like a circle, stone like a rock, round stone seed is based in Kentucky. Go to their website and they have lots of information on starting a meadow there. Technical information, exactly, you know, how to do it.
Thank you. If you hadn't suggested round stone, I was going to.
Yeah, that's the
They
point.
have a great reputation.
Yeah. Okay.
Any other questions?
Yes, hello.
Hello.
I have a question.
Sure, go for it, Great Crow.
What if you're living on rental property and you only have a limited amount of space to plant?
Oh, yeah. You know what? To me, that's the ideal place for plugs. Remember I showed you the photo of those native plant plugs?
Yes.
Yeah. So start small. It's very economical. You know, the price of, I have just been astounded. I haven't had to buy retail plants for a long time, for many years. But the cost of retail cost of plants when you're buying in 3 and 5 gallon containers has gone absolutely through the roof. It's just almost shameful that what they're charging for plants. $50 and $60 and $80
Mhm.
3 gallon containers of plants. So you start with the plugs and you start small, as I recommended earlier. Start small, plant small, with the idea that you can maybe take it with you if you ever get a place of your own. That would be my suggestion.
Another possibility is container plants.
I do have a few of those.
Yeah, on patios and balconies. People who are renting apartments and such can still have native plants, but you have to containerize them.
I
It's
have
not
some.
ideal, but it's better than nothing.
Yes. I have like 4 very small plots that I have reserved, excuse me, for butterfly milkweed, echinacea, and I'm thinking some kind of grass. I was thinking either small blue stem or broom sedge. Do you think something like that would work in a small plot?
No, those are really, I forgot, I did miss the first two, but the broom sedge is really aggressive plant.
Mm,
I would have added in my presentation somewhere in other talks I do that if you start planting aggressive plants, you have to plant other aggressive plants with them. Of course, you need the space. And if you plant something like broom sedge, you better plant some other really aggressive plants or they'll not survive. They'll just get run over. So things like Monarda fistulosa will survive, but you don't want, see, that's another one you don't want in a small space. You want those in big places, big
no,
spaces.
I have some of that in a container. But no, I was primarily thinking butterfly milkweed, echinacea. I think those are the 2 I have in there right now.
Yeah, that'll work. Those are plants that'll work for you. Yeah, much less aggressive plants. Plants that for smaller spaces. Yes, those are good. Those are definitely.
Is there anything else you'd recommend in addition to those, like for the plots, or just those 2?
I'm terrible at these off the off the cuff questions. Of the grasses, if you want a native grass that's not aggressive, stays relatively small, the sporbolus, the prairie dropseed, is an excellent grass. Stay small, it gets about 2 to 3 feet high, and it won't be seeding all over the place. That's certainly one good one there. The coreopsises, Coreopsis verticillata is another one that's easy to grow, relatively not aggressive, stays in place, flowers for a long period of time. And I forget, and of course the rudbeckias, I almost always plant rudbeckias because they bloom for so long. They're good in almost every landscape. And so those are a couple others I would add to there.
You said the drop seed, coreopsis, and what else?
The drop seed and so the coreopsis, the drop seed, those were the 2 I'm thinking of right off the top. And of course there's many others.
Okay.
From where do you buy your plugs?
I buy plugs wholesale, and they're wholesale only places. This is kind of a shame, but I think this is changing. Okay, so one of the things going on here is there's places organizing native plant sales and then buying quantities collectively because they're wholesale only places. But if you get together a collective of people buying these plugs, you can probably get into one of these wholesale places. North Creek is one of them. It's in Pennsylvania. And then in New Jersey is New Moon is the other place where you can get these plugs, lots of great places. So New Moon and North Creek, but you'll have to buy collectively to buy there. So that would be as the Native Plant Society or something like that. Okay. Oh, and the other one is ISEL. And that is a retail place, ISSEL. The prices are retail, but that would be the other, ISSEL. And I think they buy in from wholesale growers and then resell these plugs retail. And I think they're in Washington, D.C., as I recall.
It's
Go ahead.
last question. What if you've already purchased? Like I've bought a bunch of seeds from not Wild Bird, that's the different store. Prairie Moon Nursery. Is it possible to start your own plugs from seed, or is it better just to buy them straight up?
Oh, well, sure you can. Absolutely you can. I am not a grower. I am just not. And I would plant seed, naturally, and that, but I don't know. I'm not a grower, so I can't instruct you exactly how to do it. but I'm sure the instructions are out there, and yes, absolutely you can.
All right.
And by the way, I would add that Roundstone Seed sells big quantities of seeds, but they also sell little packets of seed. So if you go to the Roundstone website, you can buy small packets of seeds of many, many different plants, more than I would ever know. So that would be the place to visit if you want smaller quantities of seeds to plant.
Any other questions? I know it's late and we've gone over time but I think it was well worth it in this case. It's been delightful, Dennis. We thank you for.
Thank you, and I apologize. I didn't realize how long I had gone over. I didn't realize I thought it was 8 o'clock. No, it's 9 o'clock. All right.
It didn't matter. We enjoyed it.
Okay.
And it's just a fabulous way for us to start the new year with this presentation. And I really do appreciate your doing this for us. And you've reached a large audience. I know a few people had to leave when at a point because of time. They have other commitments.
Yeah.
But those that had the questions have stayed around and hit you with a few of them. So we appreciate this, and you and I will have some more conversations.
Okay. Good. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for hanging in there with me.
Thank you. Thank you,
Okay.
everyone, for coming, and thank you, Dennis.
All right.